Hello, and welcome to the very first AI Essentials podcast. My name's Tom, and I am the Chief AI Officer of General Purpose Training. We are an AI training company, and we help upskill people and get them using AI tools effectively. And today I'm joined by Mel, who is one of our instructors, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, Tom. I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of your first podcast episode. As you mentioned, I've been working with General Purpose as an instructor for a while, and I love everything General Purpose does. But I'm also the Chief AI Officer of Gen Futures Lab. And as part of my role as Chief AI Officer, I consult organizations on how they can get to the next level by using AI to automate and also support them on their AI adoption journey.
Wicked. Thank you so much. And Mel has done a lot of the hard work to make this podcast happen. So hats off to her. This is a very exciting, it's a slightly homespun affair for this first one. I am sitting propped up on 3 pillows on the end of my bed whilst builders dismantle my study. So if they're banging in the background, that's what that is.
Oh, well, and I'm really enjoying seeing your family pictures in the background. That makes it just all so much more professional. And, in
Really
proper
professional.
sort of like AI startup mode, we are starting somewhere. So I don't think the audience minds at all.
No. Well, hopefully most of them will be listening so they can't see. Anyway, let's get on to it. So, Mel, we're going to start this podcast every week with a roundup of the AI news of the last week. Now, obviously, so much happens in the AI space. We could dedicate 10 hours to covering the news, and we don't want to take too much time. So we've hand selected 5 or 6 stories that actually are relevant, that actually matter for what is going to happen over the next few years. And Mel is going to run us through some of these. And I think you're going to start by talking about jobs being automated. And there was a report in Forbes, right?
Yes, so there have been a couple of reports and trends indexes coming out over the past week. So last week we saw Microsoft's index with regards to the future of work for 2025, already talking about automation of jobs. And actually, the interesting thing with that one was that hiring managers now, or managers in general within organizations, are becoming more agent bosses. So the prediction is that middle management will be shifting and changing. With this latest Forbes report that came out last week, it's also a very interesting piece. So it talks about roles like customer service representative with AI chatbots and virtual assistants in the future handling essentially routine inquiries and tasks. And we already see that happening. Also, jobs like data entry clerks. So, data entry, obviously using AI, can be automated and scaled up. Also, things like telemarketing, for example, with voice models improving and using AI-powered systems to present marketing assets and video footage and products essentially in completely new ways. Also, accounting, basic accounting positions will change over time with AI applications streamlining tasks such as bookkeeping and voice processing. So a lot will be changing. Our audience might want to know, okay, but what jobs are safe? What should I retrain in? Do not fear if you are a skilled tradesperson. So if you do have hands-on expertise in plumbing, electrics, as you mentioned, Tom, you have got builders around right now. Their jobs will be safe. Also, healthcare professionals, especially when it involves direct patient care, such as nurses, therapists, that require adaptability, human empathy, and obviously any practical hands-on work with the patient. And creative fields, finally, so original thought and human creativity, won't be replaced by AI. AI can aid the process and augment it, but not replace it. So hopefully that gives you a good overview. which also leads us onto the next headline.
Yeah, well, see,
And
I think it's a sort of agency, the kind of concept of agency, the ability to take over and, give direction. A well-known engineer that works for Replit, one of the kind of founding engineers at Replit, one of the lead engineers at Replit, wrote an essay this week on it. So why don't you tell us about that, Mel?
yes, and a really interesting essay because this engineer is actually arguing that he has grown to actually dislike the term agent. So why is that? He's saying in his essay that he finds it inaccurate. So when building agents, he's writing, we are giving programs everything except agency. So he's basically arguing that the appeal of these tools lies in their combination of capability, maneuverability, and predictable behavior. And what gets the best out of these agents, or whatever we want to call them now post this essay, is a high human agency. Humans who know how to use, deploy, and direct these agents in order to achieve tasks. And I think this is an interesting one, especially for people like myself. I'm a generalist. I started out as a software developer, have worked in product management, have written content, have done loads of different roles. And, now I'm an organizational consultant. And I think for people who are generalists and don't really want to specialize because they get bored really quickly, this is your era because the specialization, the time it takes a human to come up to speed with a skill set. And I think he's arguing in his essay with his first startup, it took him 9 months to get a prototype off the ground. However, now it would take a week with AI to build a prototype and to become a specialist in an area. So we are probably going to see a lot of shifts here in terms of career pathing within education. So yeah, definitely want to watch and do have a look at Agency is Eating the World, which is the title of the essay.
By Jan Segato. Yeah, for my money, Replit Agent might be the single best agentic technology out there. Just this weekend, I needed to do some financial forecasting, and very annoyingly, our accounting package, Zero, does not have all of the information in one space. And instead of sitting down and downloading multiple CSVs across kind of different screens, I actually just went to Replit Agent. I gave it my Zero API key and said, please write a bit of software that collects these different reports from the Zero API so that I could, and then combines them into a single CSV so I can use them to create a financial forecast. And it went away and did it in about 10 minutes and sent me a notification to my phone. Oh, I should say that I did most of this on my phone. I didn't even use a laptop. I didn't need to write any code at all. I did it all via prompting on my phone. And I think that is an absolutely incredible leap forward from where we were even just 6 months ago, in all honesty. So really exciting, really exciting. Moving on to next story, Anthropic, who actually creates the model that powers Replit Agent, also released a very interesting blog post about model welfare. This is going to be one that's going to get people discussing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that Anthropic is actually talking about this because I think that's super important. So their recent article delves into actually the ethical considerations surrounding advanced AI systems. So as AI models are exhibiting more and more human-like capabilities such as communications, planning, problem solving, the company essentially raises questions. So should the potential consciousness and experience of these models be a concern? And how do we ensure safeguarding within that context? And Anthropic essentially has initiated a research program focused on model welfare. So they're not just talking, they're actually looking into that from a research perspective. And this initiative aims to investigate whether AI systems might possess experience or preferences that warrant moral considerations. So definitely a space to watch.
Yeah. Well, didn't they say something like there's a 1 in 10 chance or maybe a 15% chance that an AI model that is out there today has some level of consciousness, which I find absolutely crazy. And Mel, as an instructor in our classes, we often tell people one of the big difference between AI in a technical sense and AI as we kind of talk about in a cultural sense is this idea of consciousness. People in kind of the cultural sense in kind of AI in storytelling, AI is always conscious. When we talk about AI in the kinds of tools like ChatGPT, there's no reason to assume that there is consciousness. They're kind of missing fundamental parts of the brain that we think are kind of related to consciousness. However, some of the leading researchers are now asking whether consciousness could be an emergent behavior. And I read an essay last year that suggested that or posited that consciousness may be just a factor of compression. Basically, the more data that you put into your model and the more effectively you train it, the more likely it is to become conscious. So I think that's really interesting. And I don't know whether you caught as well. There was also another very interesting paper from Anthropic last week about, or more of a call to arms, about how we need to solve AI interpretability. Interpretability,
It's
that is
quite
a
the word.
difficult word to say, as soon as possible. And that if we are going to try and make sure that we don't have a rogue Skynet type situation, we need to be able to understand what AI is thinking and why it is coming to the answers that it does. And there needs to be a kind of Manhattan project around this kind of question of how do we look inside AI's head and try and understand why it does the things that it does? Because at the moment, just like people, we don't really know. We have some ideas, but we don't actually have a clear idea. And so I think that is going to be really, really interesting to see whether we can figure it out. And I really hope for all our sake we can. Okay.
Absolutely.
Moving on to the other big AI research lab. And actually, I guess this is a slightly related to the kind of idea of a rogue Skynet. A bunch of previous OpenAI staffers have written a public letter arguing that it should not be allowed to be turned into a corporation and should have to remain a charity. And would you like to tell us a bit more about that, Mel?
Yeah, obviously, OpenAI was set up for, a public mission, essentially. So their founding mission was to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits all humanity. So it used to be very purpose driven. So obviously now we know that OpenAI, they, want to become a publicly traded company and essentially, go public and move away from that non-for-profit model. And that caused a bit of outcry or concern by a coalition of over 30 individuals. And as you already mentioned, some of them are ex-OpenAI employees. And they wrote a 25-page letter, which was sent to the Attorney General's office in California and Delaware, saying that essentially, this shouldn't be happening. So quite a bit of drama here. And, especially given OpenAI's current valuation of around 300 billion. And they recently obviously raised more money, which led to that evaluation. It will be really interesting to see if they can transition from a non-profit controlled entity to a for-profit public benefit corporation, would be, I guess, a legal entity within the US, and what that would mean for their mission going forward.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I just finished reading a book called Supremacy, which I highly recommend. It's about the history of the founding of OpenAI and Google DeepMind, and it's so interesting how both companies were really founded with this kind of ethical viewpoint of if we are going to create AI, we need to do it in a very ethical way that benefits the world. And both of them trying to design corporate architectures in order to make sure that no one big tech company could end up owning AGI, that AI would be kind of beneficial to the world as a whole. And incrementally over a decade, the big tech companies have kind of got further and further into this. Google actually buying DeepMind outright. OpenAI obviously taking huge amounts of money from Microsoft to the extent that it's now having to change its corporate structure in order to be able to kind of facilitate that. And it's really interesting how kind of the founders were both incredibly idealistic people, but that kind of desire to be the first to unlock AGI, to develop AGI, has turned out to kind of trumpet absolutely everything. And that has allowed these kind of big tech companies to get kind of into these very idealistic research labs, and maybe not for the benefit of everyone, who knows.
Yeah, I mean, a space to watch. As you're saying, it will be really interesting how organizations, especially who are in the game of developing AGI, can put checks and balances in place. It's almost like having to go back to the foundations of political systems, you know? So yeah, really interesting.
Well, talking about the foundations of political systems, you were going to mention a story about Huawei, the big Chinese hardware manufacturer, are releasing a set of top-end AI chips to compete with Nvidia. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so again, a really interesting story, being aware that the US and China both want to have and are racing to have a monopoly when it comes to AI. So Huawei Technologies, they essentially announced its most advanced and latest AI processor, the Ascend 910D. I hope that's, how you say it, or maybe it's 910D, whatever. And that's really aimed to rival Nvidia's high-end AI chips. So at the start of the year, we saw Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang announce and launch Nvidia's new AI hardware at CES, which essentially set the trend around that and installed their leadership position for this year. So then we have been seeing essentially China now racing to have a seat at the table, or to position themselves as essentially the leaders in AI technologies. Obviously, we know that there are US export restrictions in place opposed on China. So that will be interesting to see how that pace plays out, with Chinese firms now obviously, blocked to import into the US easily. So yeah, another space to watch.
Yes, I think that this kind of almost like modern space race between the US and China for who's going to develop AGI first is the kind of single biggest trend that is powering everything these days. It's why the level of regulation on AI companies has dropped right away. Why kind of discussions around AI safety, how to kind of prevent a rogue AGI, has just disappeared, is because of this fear that if the US doesn't do it, that China will do it. And I think that the kind of the release of DeepSeek back in January, or DeepSeek version 3, which was competitive with ChatGPT despite being an open source model that was trained for a fraction of the cost, has really woken a lot of the US tech elite up to the fact that China is not very far behind. And I think this announcement by Huawei also shows that China is not far behind. I mean, there is a big difference between announcing chips and actually shipping them at the scale needed to train properly large foundation models. But it is definitely a fact that the kind of the US lead in AI is not as far ahead as you might think. And Mel, we're both Europeans. Where is Europe in this?
Yeah, that's really good question. Same as yourself, I live in the UK, so I often ask myself that, even if in terms of technology, even if I just step on a train in England. So yeah, I think Europe is a different kettle of fish. Obviously, across the EU, we see quite tight legislation with the EU AI Act around AI. And I'm aware, having spoken to businesses across the EU, that they're trying to find their way within this essentially, risk first model or approach to regulating AI. So I think there is a space to watch. I think what the things that stand out on the model development side, obviously across Europe, is France is head of the game with Mistral and the Mistral models. And, I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing more AI advancements coming out of the EU
I mean,
and Europe,
we got
sorry.
we got to hope so, right? But it just, to me, it seems frankly bizarre that we've got China and the US racing to create AGI, and Europe is like nowhere. There isn't even anyone. I mean, Mistral, you're right, is the kind of like the leader, but it's only the leader because there is no one better. Like, we haven't got anyone that's anywhere close to kind of what's going on in the US or China. And I think that is something that we just don't actually have either the chip manufacturers or the data centers here to do it. And I think that if AGI does come around, I think most Europeans would prefer to have an AGI that has European values rather than Chinese or American values. And at the moment, there is absolutely zero chance of that happening. Anyway, off of my hobby horse. We're gonna one last news article, something a bit more practical in case that geopolitical discussion was too much. They've just released the latest version of their Firefly model. Tell us about that, please, Mel.
Yeah, absolutely. So their latest image model is their image model 4 series was 4 and Ultra. And that's definitely one to watch. So these models offer enhanced realism and control. And also their 4 model is optimized for rapid ideation, while 4 Ultra delivers photorealistic results suitable for quite complex projects. I was sort of expecting this because we have obviously recently seen huge enhancements in terms of models. So Midjourney launched the beta, I think, of their V7 model series, which is amazing and also features personalization. So you click on lots of images, so it learns your style and your preferences. Then we obviously saw OpenAI's ChatGPT image model, which is like image tool upgrades, which is really good and allows now for photorealistic images and text as well. So Adobe was falling a bit behind, and over the past sort of like 6 to 9 months, I have been seeing Adobe's stock price not doing very well. So I was sort of expecting that they're trying to get into the game. They also have been announcing a video model and Firefly boards, which allows to create mood boards. And in addition to that, an upcoming Firefly mobile app for iOS and Android. So for creators who want to make use of these capabilities, definitely a product range to watch.
I think one of the things that I was impressed with the Firefly model is that it is able to generate text cleanly, like the ChatGPT image model. It's an area that Midjourney still lags behind. I mean, I think that Midjourney's images are very aesthetically pleasing, but they still haven't got that bit right. And that's because of the kind of fundamental technology, the algorithm that underlies that Midjourney is still using diffusion-based models, whereas apparently, well, certainly OpenAI and apparently Adobe have also put in an autoregressive layer, which is the same type of algorithm, an autoregressive algorithm that powers things like ChatGPT, the kind of text prediction, and it's much better at being able to be accurate about things and to kind of understand concepts, including words, which is why it's able to produce text more cleanly. So I think that's a really interesting one. And I would assume that Midjourney will follow the same approach. But actually, the image generation space is very interesting because we have seen a lot more switching around there than we have in the kind of language prediction. Stability AI was the big leader in image generation about 2 years ago, which was actually a London-based company, but they've completely dropped off the map in the interim. So, I don't know whether maybe things aren't quite as settled. I would kind of expect that Adobe would do really well in this space because they're able to plug their models into their other tools. So you can use Adobe's image generation in Illustrator and Photoshop and whatever. And a lot of creatives who already work with those tools, it's going to be a lot easier than having to learn something new. So I think that's going to be a very interesting one to watch going forwards.
And also, they're absolutely also their open ecosystem so that they allow for, AI model integration. So Firefly supports OpenAI, Google, and other models essentially. And that just, makes for a much more powerful tool range. So yeah, definitely an interesting one.
Really nice. Okay, so that's this week's news, and we're going to do a little deep dive on the kind of each week we're going to do a little deep dive on the most kind of important topic that's going on in AI at the moment that we haven't already covered. And it seems like the obvious one to do is the advent of reasoning models. Now, reasoning models have actually been around a little while, but O3, the latest reasoning model from OpenAI, has really knocked every single benchmark out of the park, pretty much. I actually saw an essay a couple of days ago that was saying before ChatGPT, we used to evaluate whether we'd reached AGI, artificial general intelligence, by whether you could have a conversation and not know that it wasn't a human. When kind of GPT 3.5 came along, we kind of blasted straight through that. So we redefined AGI as being able to make decisions and go and do tasks and use tools. 3 now blasts through that, and by kind of one measure,
Absolutely.
we have again hit AGI. But I think most of us in the industry go, it's AGI-ish, but not quite there yet. So now we need a new definition of AGI as well. But Mel, you're going to tell us a bit more about how they work.
Yeah, so reasoning models is definitely, a set of models that I guess excite me the most and that I use most in my own work as well. So when we look at sort of like traditional large language models, they were quite impressive and they're really good at things like predicting the next word and learning patterns or, understanding patterns from large data sets. But when it comes to complex problem solving and things like problem decomposition, wow, that's quite a word, reasoning models essentially excel. So rather than just giving you an answer, they break your request or problem down into multiple steps and therefore can dissect these problems in a much more detailed way and are very good at complex problem solving and essentially like reasoning, doing complex analysis. So what are the kind of areas this is actually useful for? Things like scientific research, so analyzing experimental data, drawing conclusions, designing hypotheses, validating findings, also software engineering, so debugging code, refactoring complex systems, planning deployment pipelines, and so on and so forth. It's also awesome for data analysis. So when you're trying to analyze and integrate multiple data sets for cleaning data, applying complex statistical methods, and so on. The other two spaces that I really like, where I think reasoning models will be used more and more within industry, is legal analysis. So they're very good at reading lengthy regulations and dissecting them and drawing conclusions, comparing jurisdictions, and identifying compliance gaps. And then finally, financial modeling. So in finance, AI models have been, used for quite a while now for trading, predictions, and so on. But now with reasoning models, these models can essentially conduct scenario-based forecasts. They can stress test existing models or capabilities and can also be used for dynamic risk analysis. So really capabilities that, yeah, I think blow my mind personally.
I mean, I think one of the things that I get asked a lot regarding reasoning models is when should I use a reasoning model and when should I use a normal one? When should I use GPT 4.0 and when should I use O3 or 4.5 and O3 or whatever? And a good way of thinking about it is if it is the kind of question that you would expect a person to just be able to answer off the top of their head, like what color is the sky or, what day are we going out for dinner? That is a question that you would ask to a standard model. And actually, if you ask that to a reasoning model, it's actually slightly more likely to get it wrong because it will overthink it and give the incorrect answer. However, if it is something that you need to kind of think about, like, why is it that leaves are green? Something that needs a little bit kind of more thought process or explanation, then that is something that a reasoning model will be much better at. And I think that one of the things that's so interesting about reasoning models is that on the surface of them, they seem incredibly advanced and complex, but actually they're very, very simple. All that is happening is that the AI is generating some text and then it's asking itself, okay, now what do I do? Or now what do I think about what I've written? Okay, let's write some new text based on that. Okay, let's evaluate that. Now write some more text based on that. And it can use this approach of getting itself to write more to come up with better answers. So it can say to itself, before I come up with this answer, maybe I could write a little plan because that will help me to come up with the correct answer. All it's doing is still just predicting text in the same way that a previous, standard chat GPT model is. It's just that it is asking itself a series of questions before it actually gives you the answer. And it's known as test time compute. And it has been shown that this is as effective at increasing AI capability as training a whole new generation of models. So, going from GPT-3 to GPT-4 or GPT-4 to the soon coming GPT-5, adding reasoning has a bigger impact than making your AI model 10 times larger. So it's a really, really exciting area of experimentation because it gives us another lever in which to kind of make AI models more intelligent. Although the downside is that it makes them use a lot more energy. Reasoning models use a lot more energy than standard models. So that is something that kind of will need to be factored in over time. Cool. Any final remarks on reasoning models?
I just absolutely loved how you explained reasoning models and almost that the reasoning model is asking itself, okay, what should I know about it? How should I go about this? Just to give an example to make that even more practical, I asked OpenAI's ChatGPT o3 latest reasoning model earlier to help me for a fictional company to plan its expansion into 2 new territories. And I was absolutely impressed by the result that I got. So it looked for the freshest public numbers around GDP growth rates for those 2 territories that I gave the reasoning models. Sort of put them side by side, and then in step 2, it interpreted these numbers and what they actually mean. So it conducted some data analysis. Then it sort of weighed off the trade-offs and gave me an overview of that. And as a last step, put together some recommendations. So multiple steps, often currently covered by different skill sets within an organization, all done by a reasoning model. And I guess the last thing I want to highlight is with the recent updates of the O3 model and then almost the sibling model, the O4 mini, which is a lot faster and uses a bit less compute power. We have seen incredible advancements. So with O3, for example, now being able to use tools autonomously, so it can execute codes, conduct image analysis. So if you give it a complex architectural diagram, it can actually analyze it and make recommendations based on that diagram. Also multimodal visual reasoning, so that it's able to actually describe images that you feed into the model, and also that it has got the capabilities to orchestrate tools. So it might browse the web, run a Python script, analyze a graph, and then orchestrate autonomously as part of this, problem solving chain, which almost gets us into multi-agent territory. So definitely also one to watch. And if you haven't used a reasoning model yet, general purpose obviously teaches and instructs around how to make the most of these models. So definitely highly recommend signing up to one of the courses.
Oh, look at that. What a beautiful plug. I didn't even ask you to do that. That's lovely. That's lovely. Okay, good. Well, reasoning models, go try them out. And if you need help, give us a call. Okay, now our next section we can't do this week because what we want to do is answer your questions. If you have burning AI questions that you would like an answer to, then please send them to us at hi@generalpurpose.com. And every week we'll try and answer a few of them and share some kind of information. So we'll start that from next week. But I think with that, we are done for our very first episode. If you have any feedback, please do let us know. Mel, thank you very much. Any final remarks?
It's been an absolute pleasure to be on your first ever podcast. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for doing it and for being a part of it. And we'll see everyone back next week.